started. All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Matt Badanes. I'm from Morningstar. I'm going to be talking about guardrails in the cloud at scale. Unlike what it said on the website, there are no bananas in this presentation. Sorry if you're here for the bananas. I apologize. So we probably could, but all right. So what are we doing here? Why am I talking? Here's brief outline of what I'm going to talk about today. I'll do a quick introduction about myself and and some of the high level stuff we're going to talk about. I'm going to give you a little overview of our footprint and cloud posture today, and then what we're doing to implement controls within that. And then I'll take some questions if you have them. I'm going to try to, most of this is fairly high level. If there's something you want me to go into depth more on as we get it, just raise your hand and ask, and I can happily go much deeper, but I'm trying to cover a lot of ground in 30 minutes. So whoops, wrong. All right, who am I? I'm Matt. I'm a principal cloud engineer at Morningstar. My focus is on security and architecture. At Morningstar, we have something called Cloud Services, which is a centralized cloud enablement team, which I'm a part of. I've been at Morningstar for 20 years, and the one thing I have learned is don't show your weaknesses, otherwise they show up as bananas on the title for your presentation. Thank you, Margaret, for that, who just walked into the room. Oh, hi. I won't share her weaknesses. Bananas. Yeah, it's 2:30, isn't it? I'm very prompt. I don't know. We generally try to follow these principles with at Morningstar. I think a lot of people do as well. We try to keep things very decentralized, even though we are a centralized team. We want to make sure that our developers and our product teams are able to do it in a self-service fashion when they're doing it. In order to accomplish that, we want to make sure that we have multiple accounts and everything must be as code. So my team in particular, when we lay down our foundations, use Terraform. Other teams with Morningstar use CloudFormation, CDK, whatever, command line, whatever they feel like doing. We're trying to push, especially now, we started out about 6 or 7 years ago doing this. And at the time, people were doing a lot of lift and shift and EC2 instances, and we are now pushing more for cloud native and managed services. And we want it to all be ephemeral. So you're not spinning up EC2 instances. If you're going to use EC2, put it in auto scaling. At Morningstar, this is kind of what it looks like. We have what we call team accounts that each team represents an application within Morningstar. There's about 250 plus of those. Each one of those is a prod and a non-prod, and then you have your lower environments and your upper environments. We've got 4,600 SSL certificates in ACM. We have 43,000 IAM roles with 27,000 inline policies. We have 12,000 Lambda functions, and the list goes on and on. So with it's not small, at least for us. Our team is not that big, and we're managing all, and we have to make sure that we know what the teams are doing and doing it accurately, doing it well. So how do we ensure that they're following the best practices? A team has pretty wide open controls once they're in their team account. So we need to make sure that when they're doing something, they're not doing it badly. They're not putting an EC2 instance out on the internet with no patches, that they're not putting star in for their IAM roles. How do we see it? How do we even know it's there? Because if you put out that account and you don't do anything with it, you're not going to know what's out there. And how do we encourage and enforce the better behavior? Because we have things that are important to us that they may not be thinking about, and we need to make sure that they know about it without just going to them and emailing them, because that's never going to get anywhere. So I'm going to talk about two sets of tools. I'm going to talk about the AWS specific tools that we use because this is an Amazon conference, but I will also be talking about things that are not Amazon because not everything works that way. First, I'm going to talk about, these are the things we're going to talk about. I'll talk a little about the multi-account strategy. We'll talk about CloudTrail and GuardDuty. IAM Identity Center, SSO, I'm just going to call it that because it drives me nuts. Our use of network firewall and transit gateway, yes, transit gateway and service control policies. Those will be our specific Amazon services. So our account strategy is keep it small. So we've actually been finding some of the bloat lately, but we try to say team, we try to keep it small. We try to keep it within a team. So for example, our team is responsible for laying down the VPCs. We don't make them very big. And if a team comes to us and says, we're out of IP addresses, we say, you've probably gotten too big, time to break apart. We keep them isolated. So even though I mentioned we are using transit gateway, we don't do meshed connectivity. So team 1 and team 2, their VPCs cannot talk to each other over any private link. We isolate them by environment. That just seems logical. As I mentioned, we don't allow direct connectivity, and we make sure that we're using federated login. So as best as we can, there are no IAM users in any of our accounts. First things first, CloudTrail. Any of you who are using Amazon, you probably know about CloudTrail. It's logging it's configured in all of our accounts. We started early enough that we weren't using it on the org level, so we're still deploying it account by account. But since it's tracking every single action that's being taken in the account, it's a really great tool to have. It's really great when someone says, hey, what happened to this S3 bucket? Or hey, someone's doing some anomalous behavior, we can track down those actions. We aggregate into an S3 bucket, and because I think we have about 50 million events a day at this point, we're using SQS because we're sending it to our aggregation tool choice, which is Splunk. Someone else might be using Elasticsearch with Kibana or some other tool. We found that we were ending up, it was taking days for Splunk to keep up. So we started to use SQS triggers. One thing to consider, and I just noticed this is newish, but you can actually get rid of the read-only events, which we did not do. So I recommend either turning it off or be expected to work on your retention policies, because otherwise your index is going to get very big as you're checking it. Guard duty. For those who are not aware of guard duty, it looks for anomalous behavior within actions that are being taken. Common ones are, something's connecting to an unexpected endpoint. There's IAM exfiltration, and so on and so forth. By default, it's using DNS, CloudTrail, and flow logs to find that behavior. But they've been adding more and more protections like S3, Lambda, and EKS, which have come out in the last 6 months or so. And that all can get sent to your SIEM of choice, or however you want to do it. We send ours to Splunk also, and then that gets flowed into our operations team for security purposes. So if they see an event, it gets sent to them, and they can escalate it. One thing that we found with guard duty is there's a lot of false positives. Easy example would be we're using Outposts, for better or for worse, and worse. There we go. Well, we're deprecating it, thankfully. But what ends up happening is if an EC2 instance with an instance profile makes a call to Amazon, it looks like it's coming from our corporate IP address, which guard duty thinks is anomalous because it's not theirs. So we've had to do a lot of filtering. I'll talk a little bit about how we're doing that in a little bit. All right, SSO. There was a talk about SSO. I don't see him in the room, but it was a very, very good overview of what it is. But effectively, it allows you to do SAML authentication within our corporate IDP, which, as the previous presenter talked about, is Okta as well. We've done a heck of a lot of customizing of it, because with our 250 accounts, we have 3 standard roles that we put into every account. So what we've ended up doing is we have a Lambda that's triggered by events in which if we see a new group added into SSO, we then go and try to figure out what account it should be attached to. Once we figure out what the account is attached to, we then do the role assignments and the permission sets, because we have standard permission sets that we're stamping out on every account. We have got admin, read-only, and operator are 3 standard ones. But if we have a customized one, we have Terraform, we can push that out as well. So when a new account is created, basically we have a lightweight API that sort of ties account IDs to an internal ID that our company has for these accounts, and then these are all deterministically created. So we can then determine that. Point of reason they use this is federated login is good. Someone leaves the company, they get disabled, and we don't have to worry about it. Because it's using roles, you only get 12 hours for the keys, so the keys expire after 12 hours. So even if someone puts it on GitHub, we probably don't care by the time it gets found. And IAM users are bad. But with one caveat, we do have basically, we call them, they're effectively service accounts. They have IAM keys. It's for things like if you're on premises and you need to talk to S3, we do that, but we make sure that's very tightly controlled and don't allow full open access on that. A couple of things is, in order to make it work for our use case, we had to customize it pretty heavily with our automation. Once it was set up, we don't have to do much with it at all. It's actually pretty slick. A new group appears in SSO, it automatically gets attached to the right account with the right permission sets. I think it was pointed out in the earlier presentation, but yeah, the API maturity on SSO is lacking. It's getting better every week, every quarter, every year, but initially we couldn't do anything with it automated. Like, it had no API. And now they have an API, and there's still some things we're missing that we need for compliance purposes, which require some manual work, which is not much fun. All right, network firewall and transit gateway. I think there's a talk after this about this, so I'm not going to go into too much of it, but When we started, there was nothing like this. We were using peering, and we had to put our direct connects directly into our accounts, which had lots of management overhead. With Transit Gateway, if anyone was using Transit VPCs in the past, it's Transit VPC as a service, and an improvement on peering. So what we have a shared services account which does have peering, and we hit the hard limit, so we couldn't put any more routes into our route tables. So we very quickly pivoted to Transit Gateway, and it's taken 18 months to get to the point where we are, where it's almost ready to be done. 18 months, was I right on that? Maybe 2 years, way too long. Before that, our firewalling was pretty bad on premises. We were using network ACLs. That made us all very, very sad, but we had budget constraints because of the lack of a centralized egress point. So we added network firewall to that as well, because we're Amazon people and we don't know Palo Alto that well, but we might change that. Network firewalls, like a managed firewall by Amazon. It has IDS and IPS features. You can use Suricata for rule sets. You can also just do straight up source destination type of work. And we're using this for our egress traffic. So if it's going back to our on-premises networks, or if it's going out to the internet, then it's hitting Transit Gateway and network firewall. We're finding some teething problems with cost, but we've been able to use the flow logs to extrapolate what the top talkers and start sending that back for chargeback as well. And then service control policies, which I think might be one of my favorite things, because when we started, there was no organizations, and we would lock down the standard roles, but all someone had to do was create another role, and they could bypass our controls. So with service control policies, it's like IAM restrictions for the whole account. So for example, our teams are not allowed to create VPCs, subnets, are not allowed to touch the network ACLs. So now we can basically just put a rule on the entire account and say, all right, now you can't do that. And so if someone tries to create a VPC, it doesn't matter how they're doing it, they have no way of getting around that. And it makes us pretty happy. You can put that on OUs, you can put that on accounts. We found there's like a hard limit of 5 policies, and we have more that we'd like to make. So we ended up making nested OUs. So you can put 5 on one OU, 5 on the next OU, and 5 on the next OU, which is a hack, but it works. So it's something to keep in mind. So other tools. I'm not talking about this at an Amazon conference. We use some custom and third-party options. These are sort of the 4 high-level ones I'm going to talk about. We have our custom scanners. We're using something for vulnerability management called Wiz. We use Splunk and XOR, and we're using Jira and Brinko. And we'll talk about those. So custom scanners. When we started, we looked at a lot of the tooling for some of the common security things we wanted to check for, and we had a few things that were fairly custom. So we instead of using a third-party tool, we actually wrote a lot of stuff. And basically, we've got CloudWatch event. Event Bridge. Within Event Bridge, we've got the event bus, and so actions for we've created a system where any actions coming from any of our accounts get sent back to a centralized location where we can look into them and take action on them if we want to. We also have things that run on a fixed schedule that aren't as pressing. We want to just look at the environment and interrogate it. The tech stack on that is step functions, Event Bridge, Lambda, and DynamoDB. At this point, I think in May, we had 20 million Lambda invocations that cost like $15, which is very cost effective, especially when we were in the early days, we were budget constrained and we couldn't afford the tooling. Some of the things it does, it'll take actions, it'll cut tickets. The easiest one is using our golden image. We publish an image every month that the teams are expected to use. If someone spins up an EC2 instance, we capture the run instances action within CloudTrail. We look at the payload from CloudTrail. If it isn't one of our blessed images, we just terminate it, and it's gone. And we let them know, hey, we killed your instance. We do tagging enforcement. So now at this point, if someone spins something up without the right tags, we kill that also. And then we also go out to the existing instances and cut tickets if they haven't tagged their instances properly. We also use it to catch instances that have been out for a long time. We have an auto tagger, so if something gets spun up, we found that launch time isn't very accurate. So now when something gets spun up and it gets tagged with what the create date, and then we use SCP to make sure people can't mess with that. And if we see instances that have been around too long, we cut tickets for it. All right, I'll talk a little about Wiz. It's something new for us-ish, maybe 6 months, and we've been starting to use it. It's a vulnerability management platform. It's also a cloud security posture management platform. So it does two things. It basically does sidecarring. It takes the EC2 instance, it takes the EBS volume, it takes a snapshot of it and sidecars it and checks what's on it and looks for vulnerabilities on the operating system, which is pretty slick. But it also has a pretty wide coverage of all the Amazon services. It knows all about them, it can inventory them, and it has controls for most of them. And it has support for pretty much every security standard that there is out there. It's also very good at looking at the instance, figuring out its ENI, and doing a complete trace of what it can see. So it's not just going to cut a ticket. It's not just going to report on a vulnerability because it sees it. It's going to say this is accessible by the internet, which means it can be exploited, and it makes it a higher priority. It supports serverless, and Amazon with Inspector has started to catch up with that. But I still think Wiz does better. Plus, it's multi-cloud, and we do have some footprints in other cloud providers, so it's a benefit for us. But it supports it scans Lambda, it scans ECS, it's running containers, it checks ECR images, it does Lambdas, it does EC2, and like I said, it is multi-cloud as well. Splunk and XOR, I mentioned log aggregation. So our use of Splunk is mostly for CloudTrail analysis and guard duty analysis. So we send all of those events to Splunk, which then creates I just forgot the name of it. It creates a generalized view, sends that up to a tool called XOR, which has a lot of good, pretty solid hook-ins, and then that allows our security operations team to then escalate when they see certain things that they want to look at. Yeah, that's about all I got on that. It's a nice little intermediary tool that we use for some of our workloads. And then Jira and Brinka, we have something called the Morningstar scorecard. Every week on Mondays, management gets a message saying that you have a 1-star rating or a 5-star rating, depending on how well you're doing. And that goes across cost, it goes on operations, it goes on security, and it's checking Jira for that. So what we do is we're cutting, we've cut 2.2 million tickets in our time, and Brinka on Monday morning looks at the open tickets and assigns a rating based on all of that information. So, and then Jira is the interface for that, although some people think it's too noisy, but unfortunately, if you have a lot of vulnerability images, you got to deal with that. So, but of those 2.2, 2.1 have been closed. Part of our custom scanning is we've built an interface into Jira that's usable by anybody that wants to, and it does closed loop and it handles exceptions. So if something is spun up, it's vulnerable, we cut the ticket. If a team fixes it, if they forget to close it, we close it for them. If they try to close it, we're going to open a new ticket for them, and yeah, they can't get around it. We keep looking. And we do allow for exceptions. So for example, we don't support all of our golden images. So instead of killing, I think EKS, we don't support the base EKS one because it keeps changing. So we put an exception in for that. So it won't cut tickets and it will not terminate them. And I talked way too fast, as I always do. But if anyone has questions or wants to hear more about what we were just talking about, I'm happy to go about it. Yes, sir.
I'm not sure if you mentioned it, we spoke about Jira, but when you remediate something like an instance, how do you inform the users?
If we terminate one, sorry. Oh yeah. For Jira, how do we have?
If you discovered an instance that doesn't use your AMI,
yes.
you want to kill it.
Yes.
You kill it, and then how do you?
For that we email, which is honestly a courtesy at this point. Most of our teams, the best behavior is when we turned it on. We'd see these emails come in, and it would take about 3 times. They'd spin it up once, it'd get terminated. They go, "Huh, that's weird." They'd spin it up a second time, it get terminated. They start scratching their head, and then they look and they go, "Oh, there's an email. Oh, I guess I'm not using the right image." And they look at the documentation, and it's usually someone who hasn't been in Amazon hasn't been using AWS for very long, and they learn the hard way.
So is the scorecard tied to that?
The time-based scans cut the tickets. The event-based ones usually do the killing. So, that doesn't. We could probably report on how many people have tried to not do it. It's something we could probably integrate pretty easily, but that's not. We don't do that today. Yes.
You said that you have 40,000 or so roles. How do you manage that?
A lot. Yes. Yeah.
Over or whatever changes in your process?
Yeah, so we don't, I'm sorry, oh, sorry. I keep forgetting to say that in the microphone. She's asking how we manage the 40,000 roles that are in our accounts. A lot of those are coming from the product teams themselves. That's one of the things we're trying to improve with Wiz, because Wiz we tried to do it custom where we'd go and look at every single role and say, oh, this is too permissive and this isn't. It's painful. Wiz has actually got it done pretty well. So they do report on IAM roles with excessive permissions, unused permissions. Again, they're very intelligent about the criticality. So if they see something that's publicly accessible and it has too many permissions, it raises the criticality so we can report on that appropriately.
Does it have AI or some similar capabilities?
AI capabilities. I'm sure under the hood they're doing something pretty intelligent, because otherwise we tried to look at it and it was actually pretty, it's not an easy problem to solve. So,
Yeah.
so. Yes, sir.
So your S3 CloudTrail, you're all rolling up into a single bucket.
Yes.
And then you have all by itself.
It is. It's in a security account, so it's it's isolated. Yeah, sorry. The question was the S3 bucket for CloudTrail. Is it in an isolated account? That's correct. It's owned by the InfoSec team, so they have access to it. Yes.
So you said you're finishing the transit gateway stuff. When are you gonna start looking at CloudWand?
We're just happy to be done with Purity and the Transit Gateway project. He's asking about when are we moving to the next bit for CloudWind. I at this point I'd be happy for it just to stay where it is for now. Honestly, we're gonna probably revisit network firewall because it's expensive and we're managing it and we don't really want to. So if we can get something else that our network team can then take ownership of, that make us happy. Oh, I'm being recorded, aren't I? Oops. Yes.
So you said that you have golden images. I believe that you have a bakery account. Why don't you use another recipe that prevents people from running instance from image that does not originate from the bakery?
Good questions. There's a couple of reasons for that. Sorry, he's asking why we don't just use SCP to block people from launching instances if they're not our image. I'm gonna try to go through this in an orderly fashion. First of all, when we did this, we didn't have SCP, so that was a problem. But that's, we've had SCP for long enough that we probably could have done that. But what we found is, number one, exceptions are impossible. So there are use cases like EMR. I don't know if you've ever tried to figure out what the AMI ID for an EMR instance is. It's impossible because it's hidden. So it's not like you can find it. It only pops up when the EMR service goes and spins it up. And so we can't even deterministically find that. We'd probably also run out of space within the IAM limitations from a character limit, because there's, at this point, we're managing, oh God, I'm forgetting, maybe 8 or 9 instances, and we keep 6 months of it. And there's 7 or 8 regions, and there's overhead to that. And then my personal reason was the experience isn't very good because they don't know, all they get is it's blocked by a policy and they don't know why. And then they'd have to come back to us. Well, otherwise they have an email and they know why exactly they couldn't use it. So anyone else got any questions? Yes.
Yeah, how are you managing access to bids?
Also through SSO. Through Okta, sorry. So yeah, Okta there we have, and actually I think we're using the same AD groups, the deterministic AD groups we have. So if someone has admin access in AWS in an account, they also get access to the same space in Wiz. Yes.
So you have like 13,000 S3 buckets.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, why do you have to create so many buckets and stuff?
Why do we have so many S3 buckets? We have so many S3 buckets because we have lots of developers. and you'll actually be surprised. We've tried to do some stuff with S3, and it's amazing how many Amazon services also just create S3 buckets. Like, for every CloudFormation template, it creates a bucket. For every asset, for every artifact within the CodeStar suite, it creates a bucket, and it's just, Amazon loves making S3 buckets also, but so do our developers. So
we use 30,000 buckets. I'm not really surprised.
Yeah, it's not that's the least one that's surprising. Honestly, the number of lambdas we have was more surprising to me. So it makes me happy. I kind of like lambdas. So Yeah, I mean, half of them are probably called tests and haven't been run. Yeah, no. But we're hoping Wiz will actually help pare that down because teams are more likely to delete something that's we're because we now have that visibility. We're going to start cutting tickets on that, and I guarantee when a team finds 1,000 tickets for lambdas, they're going to be like, that one can go, that one can go, and that one can go. Yeah.
And one more question on
Yeah.
the IAM user, you said there's no local IAM users, right? They're all federated.
Yeah.
So for service accounts alone, you have like IAM user or for automation,
Yeah.
IAC.
Yeah.
How do you manage this? Are you best practice?
We're using, like, I think I mentioned it, I should have sent this a little more, but for us, infrastructure as code, we're using Terraform. And so we have a space within our Terraform repository where we have a module that you can just basically stamp it out with the policy that you need and give a couple more pieces of information. And then once we've created it, the admin role is allowed to rotate keys. They're not allowed, but they're not, there's no passwords, none of them have passwords, there's no interactive login, it's just keys. We have something that looks for aged keys and cuts tickets after 3 months, and then they have to remediate that or else they get dinged on the scorecard.
So if you have the IAC and people are using IAC as a pipeline to
Yeah.
build the EC tools, right?
Mhm.
And people don't have access to create, directly they can log in or create something.
Yep.
And why do you have that problem of having the AMI problem that we were talking about earlier? Why people are using that non-standard AMI?
Oh,
Going through pipeline.
Not all of our teams are. We use everything as code. We're now trying to push a lot of our teams came into it. Like I said, I think our cloud journey started about 7 years ago. And at that time, a lot of people would just go into the GUI and go, ooh, next, and spin up their EC2 instance. Yeah, exactly. ClickUps. I love that word, actually. I'll be honest, I heard it the first time today and it makes me happy. So there are different teams that are further along in their maturity, and some of the teams are still doing ClickOps. And that's usually the 90% of the time we're terminating things that just someone's kicking the tires on. So yes.
Do you ever think you have like a security ticket eventually down the line, just do it as infrastructure is called everything?
Oh, like cut a ticket. You're asking if we could, if we'll cut tickets for teams that aren't doing infrastructure as code.
Yeah.
That would be a good idea, actually. I like that idea. We'll make a note of it. Yes.
You said that you have everything in code. So in case you need to terminate an account, do you have an automated job for this as well?
Sorry. The question is if we have to terminate an account, do we have a pipeline for that? And honestly, we've killed like 2 accounts. Yeah. So we have like 3. We have our life cycle is kind of active, paused, which is we had when we first started, everyone wanted their own Amazon account. We're like, all right, great. We cranked them out, and then the bills started to come in, and a lot of teams said, oh, we can't afford that, and they said, all right, we're done with this account. And occasionally we would kill the account. And then a year later, they come back and go, we want our account again. And we're like, okay. So, our email address for the root account is deterministic. And because it was held by this killed account, we had to go and find some hacky way you could still technically log in even though the account was dead. And so it became a nightmare. So we basically, as long as the team existed, we'd pause the account instead, and then we can just and just rename it. So
Basically, the cloud trail works with that.
yeah. Exactly. So it's still there. It just sort of drifts. And then when we unpause it, it undrifts. Yeah, exactly. Like accounts are easy at this point. It's not, they just are. And their base stuff has very little cost, if anything. So, all right. Yeah. Oh yeah. Yes, Margaret.
And the banana is for scale?
The banana is not for, the banana is a fixed size. It doesn't really scale. So that's why there are no bananas in this discussion. So I'm glad I talked fast. Thanks for all the questions. Anything else? No? All right, great. Thanks so much for listening.